I think it's kind of interesting. Marena announced at the beginning of her talk that her superpower was the ability to wake people up. Those of you who have heard me speak know that my superpower is making people go to sleep. So in the Marvel verse, we'd be adversaries, Marena. So I'm glad this isn't the Marvel universe, because USDA has enjoyed a very good relationship, good partnership with NIDIS and with everybody here in trying to, okay. All right. Okay, I'll try not to wake people up. I don't want to steal anybody else's superpower. We have enjoyed a fantastic partnership, not just with NIDIS and the rest of NOAA, but also with, the people from the states, the people from the state governments, from the Mesonettes, to get where we need to get to in using soil moisture. And I would just like to give a little bit of a, demonstration on how we got to where we are today at USDA. And one of the first things I like to talk about is my first experience with people using soil moisture. This was actually a memo. I was very proud of myself. I received this on a trip over 20 years ago, and I actually found that folder. So I show this as much as possible just to say, hey, this is why I have all that paper in my office. This is a good excuse. I found this, but long story short, USDA leverages weather information to trigger their programs. And back in 2000, one of the issues was one of the programs was looking at the percent of soil moisture available. This was back in 2000. Now, they used rainfall as a proxy for soil moisture. And we all know that that's not a perfect thing to do, but the policy makers in USDA understood the importance of soil moisture. They just didn't know where it was and how to get it. They were responding to people telling them how dry their fields were. Now, back in 1991, USDA's National Resources Conservation Service began, the SCAN network, which you'll hear more about today. That was, back in 1991, as of 2020, they had over 220 sites. At about the same time, we had state mesonets. I'm using the Oklahoma mesonet as an example because, back in 2000, when everybody was looking for additional soil moisture, they were at that time the gold standard. So we were like, boy, I wish we could form partnerships with them to get more soil moisture information so that we could, use it in our programs. Now, if you go back a few years earlier than that, 1996, there was a call to action from the Western Governors Association to do a better job with assessing drought and determining what the needs were, what was the actual damage to the drought, how do we make long-term decisions on how to avoid the drought being as bad as it is now. And they had wildfires, not just losses in rangeland, forage production, but they had fires similar to what we see just about every year during a Western drought. So there was a call to action from the Western Governors Association. Now, in response to that, USDA co-chaired a National Drought Policy Commission. They issued their report in 2000. Part of that recommendation was to develop a coordinated national data repository, data network, including soil moisture, because I actually heard from ranchers and farmers saying that was the big gap. I know how much rain fell, how much is really down there. Can you tell me what's going on in the root zone? So they responded to that. Now, the Western Governors Association looked at the findings of a committee that said, okay, here's how we should really set about addressing goal 2 of the 2000 report. And we outlined how to get systems to talk to each other, how to bring new information online, how to bring attention to the fact that, we don't have soil moisture across the country. The White House took notice of the report. So the Office of Science and Technology Policy said, yes, that's a good idea. Decision makers, we should start to prioritize some of these goals. Okay, so this is, 5 years. So the wheels are finally starting to turn after that call to action in 1996. Now, Congress basically said, that's a great idea. NITIS was born. NITIS was basically the result of all of those years of work by folks like Roger Polwarty, and others who were saying, we can do this. We can build this network. We can build this system, but it's not just going to be a database. It's going to be a community outreach effort. We are going to inform people how to use soil moisture and how to plan for drought. NITIS put together their report on how to get all of this stuff done, and the national academies took notice and said, okay, now that we're talking about these networks, here's how many soil moisture networks or stations we would need in a national network. And they said 3,000. And at the time, USDA had about 200, maybe a little bit less at that point. And I was in a meeting and they go, USDA is going to be responsible for getting 3,000 stations. And I about fainted. I was like, it's like, do you know how much these cost? We knew we were going to need partnerships. Okay, so the groundwork was laid. We developed the partnerships, we located the data, and then came the drought of 2012. And people said there needs to be a better job coordinating this. So there was another call to action to get things in place like a national soil moisture network. And if you work with the government, I'm pretty impressed. It only took them 16 years to come up with the same idea twice. Okay. But we were in a lot better position in 2012 because we started having the pieces in place. We had the partnerships, people were talking with each other. So what happened was another series of policy level decisions going from left to right. USDA and NOAA updated their MOU. In the MOU, we explicitly said we will work together on developing a national soil moisture monitoring network. A few years later, when President Obama released his climate action plan, the National Drought Resilience Partnership was mentioned. It's like, we need to be ready for drought because it's inevitable. There is no, hey, we had a drought, that'll never happen again in my lifetime. And look what the folks in the Colorado River Valley are going through. And even my state, Maryland, which is a fairly wet climate, we do have issues with drought. So we need to be ready for what it looks like in our area. In 2018, when NITIS was reauthorized, they were put in charge of developing a framework for this national soil monitoring network. It's like, what will this look like? And in the same year, USDA was tasked with finding a way of bringing soil moisture information into the drought monitor. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the US Drought Monitor, in a nutshell, it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room when it comes to getting data, especially things like soil moisture, to improve the product, to quote unquote improve the accuracy of the product, because USDA leverages in any given year billions of dollars in relief based on the drought monitor. Now, people aren't always happy with the way the drought monitor is depicted. So Congress said, we want you to use soil moisture. And this is going back to drought in the high plains in 2017. It's like, why isn't there any soil moisture? Why isn't the mesonet more robust? Why are the drought monitor authors ignoring this, et cetera? So we were tasked with finding a way of increasing the amount of soil moisture data. This is the language. If anybody wants to look it up, it's the 2018 Farm Bill. section 12512, which I've almost got tattooed on my arm because I've been, working on this so hard. The first step was to survey the drought monitor authors and ask them what they really needed. Somebody's using their superpower to get me to talk faster. Is that what that beep was? So anyway, I surveyed the authors, and then we started coming up with recommendations on how to get more. But if you read the language, it explicitly states you will find in situ soil moisture profile measuring devices, and you will work with non-feds. Well, we knew this. We had known this for years. We had been talking about it. And correct me if I'm wrong, Marena, I don't know if you know the exact date, but since 2013, USDA, NOAA, and our partners had been working on trying to develop a coordinated national soil moisture network. And now they're telling us, okay, get going with it. So we had the pieces in place, luckily. Now, the survey of the drought monitor authors yielded some interesting information. These are like the top 10 products that the authors said they use. Just about every author uses each one of these. And the NL- soil moisture was the product that they all used routinely. But other products were used by the authors. In fact, several of them did look at the in situ scan information in the Western states, but not everybody used it, okay? Because, the way the system works is the drought monitor authors, they download the information into their own networks, and then they use their own GIS framework to make the maps. We're trying to improve on that, but again, that takes time and money too. But the bottom line was when we talked to the drought monitor authors, they said, yes, we can use soil moisture data. Yes, the in situ data would be nice to look at. We just need it in a form that we can work with under our current system. And again, that's something that we're working with. But we're able to do that because of the partnerships we've had, well, for 10 years now, going back to 2013. It's still difficult, as you all know, but we're getting there. The recommendations to make this get done in the report, to the Secretary of Agriculture was to find ways to get in situ data into the drought monitor more easily. And I'm not going to go through and read these, but one of the key issues was if we're going to use soil moisture, how can we incorporate it into the drought monitor because it has a short period of record? The drought monitor puts drought into historical perspective. So ideally, they would have at a minimum 30 years of data at a site. They use 100 years worth of data. But again, we responded. That's a research project that NITIS is working on. I just talked to Nathan Edwards. He's got some ideas that they're forming in that upper Missouri River Basin project. So we're using not just existing resources, but we're using new opportunities to try to advance on how we use soil moisture, how we can inform people in the future. Mesonets, here's how you can get soil moisture information, to your constituents. Now, USDA, as you're probably all aware of, has its own suite of products. This was based on a survey that I did for NOAA earlier this year, and USDA has a total of about 3,800 stations. Now, not all of those are soil moisture, obviously. The scan is still in the 200s, but as you'll hear, the raws, and Stephanie Connolly can tell us more about that. We're trying to retrofit existing stations using some of the new funding that has come up, with the infrastructure laws. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge getting people to, I don't want to say focus because my boss might be listening, but remember the first chart where I said, okay, at the policy level, people recognize the importance of soil moisture and they tried to apply without really knowing how difficult it really is. that's something that people like me are trying to do. I'm trying to say, hey, okay, we're trying to do this. We can do this, but there's limitations. And my last slide is, I just wanted to show you one of the challenges that USDA is facing. I mean, in a vacuum, let's say there were no partnerships. These are the USDA observation stations in the Western US. And it's a little difficult to see, but you see these gaps. Okay, we're going to talk on Thursday about these gaps in the forested areas. So even though we have, a lot of stations that we maintain, we have good partnerships now, there's still challenges ahead. And again, on Thursday, we'll talk about, the problems, I'll just keep saying challenges, that's a good word, that we had in getting information from sites under canopies. So that's all I have. I see that most of you are still awake. I was scared when I heard nobody had coffee before I got up here. I figured that's a deal breaker. But anyway, I'm willing to answer questions later. But again, welcome. Thank you. I know that my career has been spent, a great deal on drought and trying to get a coordinated soil moisture network. And I am very pleased, not just with the partnerships, but also the friendships I made over the years. So again, enjoy the next 3 days, and thanks for bearing with me.
Do we have questions for Mark? We have a microphone in the back there as well, if I can't run to you.
Does this work?
Great.
Okay, great. I'll just have a quick comment and then get back to you. I just want to mention, you don't know this, Mark, apparently, but you should. Mike Kosh and Victoria are working on a period of record project.
Yes.
So that's great. Mike Kosh doesn't take enough credit for what he does. Anyway, that's going to be an important project.
I realize it's probably difficult to answer because there's a lot of agencies involved, but I'm just wondering, in the timeline that you presented, if you have a rough idea for us of sort of how the federal commitment to funding these types of activities from the congressional level has been. Has it been increasing level? Have there been droughts?
That's a good question. There's a big difference between approved and appropriated. So not everything gets appropriated. For starters, the section of the Farm Bill that I was discussing had a $5 million budget anticipated. They just never got around to funding it. I don't want to speak for other agencies, but a lot of times they're expected to be done in hide. So there's often not a lot of new funding available. And if you're looking at an agency that does more things than weather stations, sometimes they have to decide internally who gets what from year to year. So I don't know of many. And again, people, please correct me if I'm wrong. There aren't many opportunities in USDA where people say, okay, we're going to give you this much money and you're going to put this in there, and then they actually get the money. So it's the way it is. Just to talk about priorities, again, going back to that Farm Bill, that was 2019. So right about the time I put that report on my boss's desk, we got shut down by COVID, and USDA, well, not USDA, but there was a trade war with China. So between COVID and the trade war, and I will call it a trade war because I can retire anytime I want. So, but there were other issues taking up people's time and attention. And I was basically told, hey, go do what you can with this. So, but fortunately, NITIS was a partner. Other agencies in USDA we're partners. I started developing friendships among the Mesonet operators and the state climatologists. So we were able to do a lot with what we had. So it's never enough to do, you can't do everything, but I think we're doing a more efficient job with what we have, just based on these collaborations. So, see, I told you I could talk a lot.
I know the US Drought Monitor is using Python to ingest everything that possibly can. But what about like interdepartmental data lake efforts for accessibility, interoperability, access? You know, it seems like there'd be a synergy there to promote the overall effort.
Yeah, there's a couple of problems with the individual authors doing everything on site. That's one of them. Now we have a cooperative agreement with National Drought Mitigation Center to develop that infrastructure so that they can pull all of the products in and the drought monitor authors can go online and get everything that they need. So we are working on that. The other thing is something that actually hit us a couple of weeks ago. The GIS system is ARC. It's either ArcMap or ArcPro. I forget which. Esri is very sneaky in how they, sort of force people into upgrading. And I found out the hard way. I had a new version and one of the older products didn't work. It should have worked on, you would think it would work on a new version. So now if all of these like 6 or 7 institutes are running different versions of that GIS, it's possible that some problems might occur, so the answer is yes, we're working on that, but we're trying to do it in a hurry before we start getting in any more ArcGIS problems. So, and we have a framework where we can't have soil moisture products being shipped in. It's just a matter of figuring out what the drought monitor authors need, things like that. So. I work with CPC and I used to work with them in the 1980s and we programmed in Fortran. I think they're still programming in Fortran. It's just the way it goes, so it's like a Y2K issue. All these old COBOL programmers had their jobs again. Maybe that's why they do it. But yes, I agree. But the wheels turn slowly sometimes.